Okay, guys, now we'll be determining the gradient, the average gradient. So I hope you remember that when we were calculating a gradient of a straight line can be this way from point A to B, or this way from point A to B. This is called what? A straight line. It can either be decreasing or increasing, or constant, not increasing, not decreasing. So now what you're gonna do, remember how we calculated the gradient of this line from point A to B, given that there's values of A, values of point A. Let's say point A is -1, the value of x, but y is 4, and the value of x here is 0, and y is -2. And then you are asked to calculate the gradient of this line. You will use the formula m is equals to y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So you can choose this to be your first point, and then this to be your second point. And then now what you're gonna do, you look at the value of y at your second point. So this is your second point. The value of y is what? -2. -2. And then you look at the value of y at your first point. The value of y at your first point is what? Is 4. But there's a negative here. It's negative, and then you put the 4, all divided by, you look at the value of x at your second point. The value of x at your second point is what? 0, minus the value of x at the first point. The value of x at the first point is what? Is -1, minus -1. And then when you punch this on your calculator, -2 minus 4, you get a -6, and then negative multiplied by a negative, it's a positive, and then you get 1. Therefore, your answer will be -6. And then if you get a negative answer for your gradient, that means the line is decreasing. If you get a negative number, that means your line is what? Is decreasing. But if now this was positive, that means our line was going to be increasing. So the value of this line is going to be positive, since the value of the gradient of this line is going to be positive, since is what? Is increasing. But this one is decreasing, that means it's going to be negative. So you found a -6 here. So this is how we calculated a gradient, and then of a straight line. Now the case is different. Let's say now we are given a function like this. We are given a function like this. The function is no longer a straight line. Now is a what? Is a cubic function. Sorry, it's a quadratic function. And let's say you have a -2 here, a +2 here, and a -3 here. And then they ask you to calculate the gradient. How will you go about calculating the gradient? So this one is not going to have like a same gradient throughout, because you see it's decreasing, and then after the 0, it's now what? Increasing. So the gradient varies at each and every point. So the gradient at this point is not going to be the same as this point. And the gradient at this point is not going to be the same at this point. So in this case, we calculate a so-called average gradient. We're not particularly calculating the exact gradient, but we're calculating what? The average gradient. But we'll get into calculating the exact gradient, whereby we'll calculate the gradient at this point, or the gradient at this point, or the gradient at this point, given any value of x, where we have to calculate the value, the gradient at that particular point. So now what we do, we use what we know. You remember, we know that when calculating a gradient, we use y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So now instead of them saying calculate the gradient, they will simply say calculate the gradient at x equals to, the average gradient at x equals to negative, at x equals to negative 2 and x equals to 0. So we can see here x is negative 2. Ne? And we can see here x is what? X is 0. The x-axis, these are the x-axis. X from here, it starts from 0, going 1, 2, 3, 4 until, and then negative 1, negative 2 until negative infinity. And then here x is 0. So at this point, x is facing what? Is facing 0. That means x is 0 at this point. So this point is 0 is to negative 3. And then at this point, x is 2, x is negative 2, but y is what? Y is 0. So they will say calculate the average gradient between the values x equals to negative 2 and x equals to 0. So x is negative 2 here, x is 0 here. So they want the average gradient. So you can see that 2 points form a straight line. So we can now use the straight line formula to calculate what? The average gradient of this cubic function given the particular, the specific points that they gave us. So now, how do you go about calculating this? We'll simply choose which point. We'll simply choose one point to be our first point and the other to be our second point. And then we calculate what? We calculate the gradient using this formula. And then what's the value of y at our second point? The value of y is what? Negative 3. And what's the value of y at our first point? The value of y at our first point is negative 2. And what's the value of x at our second point? The value of x at our... Sorry, you have to put brackets here because you'll be wrong. And then what's the value of x at our second point? Second point is this, x is 0. What's the value of x? Remember the previous example that we did, x was 0 and now it's still 0. It doesn't mean it will be always, it's always gonna be 0. It changes. It's just that a coincidence happened to the examples that I'm using now. And minus x at the first point, x at the first point is negative 2 into negative 2. And then we can see now that we have negative 3 plus 2. You're gonna get, you can simply punch this on your calculator. You're gonna get negative 1 over 2. So the gradient is what? Is half, negative half. Since it's negative, that means it's decreasing here. So you can see the function, the original function, the what's this called? The quadratic function, it's decreasing from this point to this point. Like it's decreasing, you can see it's going down from this point to this point. Hence, our average gradient is what? Is negative. Let's look at a practical example that they might ask you in an exam or a test or whatever the case may be. I'll say, given the function or graph f of x equals to 5x squared minus 4, calculate the average gradient between x equals to negative 4 or x equals to say negative 1. So how do we go about calculating the thing in this case. So we are given the value of x, but we don't have the value of y. So remember, whenever we calculate a gradient, you have to have the value of x and the value of y. But now we have the value of what? We have the value of x only. We don't have the values of y. But they gave us what? The function. So we know if we can take this -4 and put it wherever there's what? There's x, we're going to get the value of what? The value of y in correspondence of -4. So f of x is the same as y, or is the same as g of x, is the same as h of x. So f of x equals to y, g of x equals to y, h of x equals to y. So this basically means the values of y. F of x basically means the values of y. So we have f of x here. We can just write down everything and remove the f of x. Instead of f of x, we put what? Y, because they are the same. So now 5 into, we put -4 where there's x. -4 minus 4. What do we get our y value as? Because this one is gonna give you, it's gonna give you 20 mus. Sorry, there's a squared here. -4, then you're gonna get 76 here, and y for x equals to -1. And then now look, you have -4 corresponding to what? 76. This is your first point. -4 corresponding to 76. And then now we look at where x is equals to -1. Let's write this as it is. 5 into, where there's x, we put what? -1. -1 squared minus 4 equals to, what do we get here? This is 1. And you can see that -1 corresponds with what? +1. So -1 corresponds with +1. So this is your second point. And then how do you go about calculating your gradient? You'll simply say gradient is equals to y2 minus yy over x2 minus x1. And then what's your y value at your second point? Y value at the second point is 1. Minus, what's your y value at the first point? Y value at the first point is 76. And what's your x value at the second point? X value at the second point is -1, minus what your x value at the first point. X value at the first point is what? -4. And then what do you get when you calculate the gradient? You will punch in your calculator and you will get -25. So what does it tell you? Since it's negative, it means the function is what? Is decreasing.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. See you on the next video.